Hello, I'm Dilek Tuna and you're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. Former US State Secretary Hillary Clinton denies any personal connection to Jeffrey Epstein during her congressional testimony. US and Iran described their Geneva talks as positive but without a breakthrough, with more negotiations planned for next week. And Pakistan launches fresh strikes on Taliban targets in Kabul after cross-border attacks. Former US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has told a congressional committee investigating the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein that she had never met him and had no information about his criminal activities. Her husband, former President Bill Clinton, is set to testify later today.
Behind closed doors, the former First Lady of the United States, Hillary Clinton, met with lawmakers in New York over her links with the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein on Thursday. She said she had no information to share about his criminal activities.
Well, I have just finished testifying. I answered every one of their questions as fully as I could, based on what I knew. And what I knew is what I said in my statement this morning. I never met Jeffrey Epstein, never had any connection or communication with him. I knew Ghislaine Maxwell casually as an acquaintance. But whatever they asked me, I did my very best to respond. I don't know how many times I had to say I did not know Jeffrey Epstein. I never went to his island. I never went to his homes. I never went to his offices. So it's on the record numerous times.
The deposition had to be paused briefly when a leaked photo of Clinton appeared online by Republican Senator Lauren Boebert. Boebert says she does not recall sending the photo.
You sent that picture? I just returned to my hotel room and installed a BleachBit software and took a camera to my iPad. So I guess in regards to photos, I do not recall.
House Oversight Chairman James Comer said the deposition went well.
And I think that this was a productive deposition today. I think we learned a lot. There were a lot of questions that we asked that we weren't satisfied with the answers that we got, but we will continue to move forward. Any of my colleagues, every member of the committee asked questions. And
former President Bill Clinton is scheduled to testify on Friday. He's denied wrongdoing and expressed regret for his association. Committee Chair James Comer said there are currently no allegations of wrongdoing against the Clintons.
US diplomatic efforts over Iran's nuclear program appear to be moving forward, but quite slowly. Officials from Washington, Tehran and Muscat have signalled progress, but talks in Geneva ended with no sign of a breakthrough, with more negotiations scheduled for next week in Vienna.
Nuclear talks between the United States and Iran in Geneva have been described as positive, according to a US official. The negotiations in Switzerland brought together President Donald Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and Iran's Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi. Oman has been mediating contacts between the two sides as efforts continue to revive diplomatic engagement over Iran's nuclear program. Although the overall tone was described as constructive, it's reported that the US side had been disappointed with Iran's positions during the morning session. The two sides plan to resume negotiations after consultations in their respective capitals, with technical level discussions scheduled to take place next week in Vienna. That's according to Omani Foreign Minister Saeed Badr al-Busaidi in a post on X after the talks concluded. We have finished the day after significant progress in the negotiation between the United States and Iran, the Omani Foreign Minister wrote. Earlier, a senior Iranian official told Reuters that the two sides could reach a framework agreement if Washington separates nuclear and non-nuclear issues. Speaking later in the evening, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Tehran and Washington had moved closer to agreement.
We made good progress and very seriously entered into the elements of a possible agreement, both in the nuclear field and in the area of sanctions. On some issues, we have now become very close to an understanding. On certain other issues, we still have differences of opinion. The technical teams will begin technical talks in Vienna on Monday at the International Atomic Energy Agency. And with the assistance of the agency's experts, we will try to bring some of the technical issues into a framework so that it can later be aligned with the political demands of both sides.
He added that a further round of negotiations will be held in less than a week. No joint statement from the United States or Iran was immediately released.
Turning to Ukraine, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has confirmed plans for a possible trilateral meeting in Abu Dhabi. It's after talks between Kyiv and Washington in Geneva about post-war reconstruction.
Talks between Ukrainian and US officials took place in Geneva on Thursday and lasted several hours, focusing on post-war reconstruction and preparations for a possible settlement framework. After the meeting, Ukraine's top negotiator, Rustem Umerov, briefed President Volodymyr Zelensky. The Ukrainian leader said he had also been in contact with US President Donald Trump and confirmed that preparations are underway for a trilateral meeting expected in early March in Abu Dhabi.
Today, I spoke several times with Rustem Umerov, David Arakhamia, and the American president's representatives, Stephen Witkoff and Jared Kushner, as they were wrapping up their meetings. There is more readiness for the next trilateral meeting. Most likely the next meeting will be in the Emirates, in Abu Dhabi. We expect the gathering to happen at the beginning of March to finalize everything. Everything that was agreed for real security guarantees, to prepare a meeting at the level of country leaders.
The Geneva discussions came despite continued fighting. Hours before the talks began, Zelensky said Russia launched 420 drones and 39 missiles targeting energy and other critical infrastructure across 8 Ukrainian regions. Dozens of people were reported injured. Moscow later said its air defenses shot down 220 Ukrainian drones over a 9-hour period, including several heading towards the Russian capital. Russian officials also reported missile strikes on the border region of Belgorod. The war has now entered its 5th year. Despite US brokered contacts, Kyiv and Moscow remain far apart on key issues, including territory.
And following on from this, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova has accused Ukraine of threatening Europe's energy security by stopping oil flowing through the Druzhba fuel pipeline to Hungary and Slovakia. Ukraine says the pipeline was damaged by Russian strikes in late January and says it has not yet repaired it.
No doubt these actions threaten the energy security of these countries, Hungary and Slovakia, and of the European continent as a whole. This Kyiv regime actions has understandably provoked outrage of the Hungarian and Slovak authorities, who view the regime's actions as a direct infringement on their sovereignty. In this context, the lack of an appropriate response from European institutions, which are supposed to protect the interests of their member states, and the absence of any reaction to the Ukrainian attacks on the Druzhba oil pipeline are hardly surprising.
Denmark has decided to call early elections after US President Donald Trump's renewed interest in the Arctic island. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has called the snap elections as she looks to capitalise on rising support and to redefine its relationship with the US.
Denmark is heading to a parliamentary election on the 24th of March 24 in what is shaping up to be a high-stakes and potentially decisive vote centred on Greenland, global tensions and pressure at home. Danish Prime Minister Frederiksen called the election as her approval ratings climb, fueled by her firm response to renewed interest from US President Donald Trump in annexing Greenland. She has flatly rejected any suggestion of selling the Arctic territory and rallied European allies behind Denmark's sovereignty.
I ved, hvad jeg står for.
You know what I stand for. Whether I should continue to be your Prime Minister, that depends on how strong a mandate you give the Social Democrats. The parliamentary election will be held on March 24th, 2026, because much suggests that it will be a close election. It will be an important election. Yes, it will also be a decisive election, because it will be in the coming 4 years that we as Danes and we as Europeans we'll truly have to stand on our own. We must define our relationship with the United States. We must rearm and secure peace on our continent. We must stick together in Europe, and we must secure the future of the Danish Commonwealth.
The dispute over Greenland has boosted her international standing, building on her COVID-era leadership and support for Ukraine. But at home, many voters are still worried about rising food prices, strained public services and inequality. The election will test whether Danes back her global leadership or punish her government for neglecting domestic issues. Her administration, a rare cross-party coalition formed in 2022 between Fredriksen's Social Democrats, the Liberals led by Defence Minister Troels Lund Poulsen, and the moderates headed by Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen, may struggle to keep its majority as traditional political divides return. With immigration also set to feature heavily, the vote will decide whether Denmark prioritizes stability abroad or greater focus on problems at home.
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has arrived in Mumbai on his first visit to India, aiming to reset relations and expand trade. The trip comes as Ottawa seeks to reduce economic independence on the United States amid tensions with US President Donald Trump. Analysts say Washington's rhetoric has pushed Canada to strengthen ties with other major economies, including India. Relations between Ottawa and New Delhi deteriorated in 2023 after Canada accused India of involvement in the killing of a Sikh separatist leader. Both sides agreed last year to restore diplomatic services. Columbia University student Elmina Agayeva has been released after her detention by US immigration agents. The case sparked protests and raised questions about protections for foreign students on campus.
New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani met U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House on Thursday for talks focused mainly on housing affordability. During the meeting, Mamdani also raised the early morning detention of Elmina Agayeva, a student at Columbia University. Mamdani later said the president told him she would be released imminently. The Department of Homeland Security confirmed she had been freed, but said removal proceedings were underway, describing her as being in the country illegally after her visa was allegedly terminated in 2016. Her lawyers say she was wrongly detained, and a federal judge ruled she cannot be deported without a court order. Columbia's acting president, Claire Shipman, said federal agents entered a residential building at around 6:30 in the morning after claiming they were searching for a missing child. Shipman said a public safety officer repeatedly asked for a warrant, which was not produced before the student was taken away.
Let me be clear. Misrepresenting identity and other facts to gain access to a residential building is a breach of protocol. All law enforcement agencies are obligated to follow established legal, ethical standards.
The Department of Homeland Security denies misrepresenting its intentions, saying the building manager and the student's roommate allowed agents inside. The detention sparked protests on campus, with students and union representatives calling for stronger protections for non-citizen students.
We're calling for the university to take appropriate actions regarding their tolerance and treatment of federal law enforcement officials, and we are also calling for them to protect the student body and do more for us as we try to continue our education.
We have to do this because Columbia will not defend its own students and student workers. We have to do this because Columbia will not defend its own students and student workers. We have to keep us safe. We have to keep us safe.
Arrests on campus remain rare, even during the current immigration crackdown. But this case has heightened concern among international students about their safety and legal status.
Argentina and Uruguay have established the free trade agreement between the Mercosur bloc and the European Union, marking a major step forward for a deal after 25 years of negotiations. Argentina's Senate approved the treaty by 69 votes to 3. Uruguay also endorsed the agreement the same day. The pact still requires approvals by Brazil, Paraguay and the European Union before it can enter into force. While the agreement has strong support from EU economies such as Germany and Spain, it faces opposition led by France over concerns that increased imports, including beef and sugar, could undermine domestic farmers. Now, after the break, we'll unpack what the latest Geneva round means for the future of US-Iran nuclear diplomacy and whether it can avert renewed regional confrontation. Stay tuned. Welcome back to A News. US-Iran indirect nuclear negotiations have resumed in Geneva this week against a backdrop of heightened regional tensions and significant military posturing. While both sides report progress in diplomatic engagement, key differences remain over core elements like enrichment limits, inspections and sanctions relief. We'll unpack what Geneva delivered and what it didn't, as both capitals publicly weigh the prospects for de-escalation or renewed stalemate. Let's bring in our guest. Gustavo de Aristegui is a former diplomat joining us from Rabat, Morocco. Ambassador, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
So as far as context, from what we're hearing, there's some language of progress in Geneva. In diplomatic terms, how do you assess where these negotiations actually stand?
Well, there is a very clear thing that needs to be underlined. Any negotiation that pertains to trying to move the regime of the Ayatollahs into reasonable positions is always very complicated. Let's not forget that they have been doing the same things over and over again since 1979. They try to persuade people that they are a legitimate, reasonable, legally established state, and it's a state that exports terrorism, that exports instability, insecurity, that is a thug state, in fact, with its own people, and will use any sign of weakness, any doubt, any obstacle that the West or any other nation that negotiates with them as a sign of weakness. So right now, the only way to negotiate with Tehran is with a show of force in the Arabian Sea and in the Gulf, and also in the Eastern Mediterranean, to show them that the stick is there just in case they do not comply. It is very important to underline a second factor. The factor is that the claims of the Iranian regime that their nuclear program is civilian and for peaceful purposes is a blunt lie. If it is a civilian program, why is it that they are enriching uranium to levels beyond 70%? It is exclusively to reach 90%, which is the weapons grade uranium enrichment. If it is a civilian peaceful program, why is it that it depends of the leader of the revolution and it is managed and guarded by the Revolutionary Guards that have recently been considered or dubbed as a terrorist organization by the European Union? And third, if it is a peaceful program, then why the facilities are buried under hundreds of meters of concrete and sand? None of this shows good faith. The third point, in the demands that are made by the West and the United States, there is a very clear point that is not being acknowledged and is not being followed or accepted by the Iranian regime. They need to stop building long-range missiles. And right now they're arming with these mid and long-range missiles the Houthis that are blocking, menacing, threatening world trade through the Strait of Bab el-Mandab and the Gulf of Aden, going towards the Red Sea to go to the Suez Canal. They are developing hypersonic weapons. They are developing new generations of intercontinental ballistic missiles. And eventually they will have one that will reach any point of Europe and eventually even the United States, even if that today has not yet been confirmed. As we know, United States intelligence says that they are not yet at that point. And while they're negotiating with the United States that has a flotilla of 2 carrier strike groups, they are purchasing supersonic anti-ship missiles from China. Is that a sign of good faith? No.
Okay, Ambassador, how much of the public optimism is strategic signalling versus actual narrowing of core differences? In other words, are we seeing posturing or real movement?
Well, I really believe that Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance, and Trump himself want diplomacy to prevail. But diplomacy to prevail means that the deal has to be the right kind of deal. It cannot be a re-edition, a second chapter, a second edition of the JCPOA. The JCPOA was a complete and absolute disaster. Unfreezing assets for the Iranian regime was a disaster. Let's not forget that when President Joe Biden unfroze $7 billion that we know of, $7 billion of frozen Iranian assets to free some American hostages, true. The Iranian regime gave oxygen to the Syrian regime that was able to resist some months more, even a year more. Let's not forget that with that money, Iran has been financing terror organizations, be it Hamas, be it Hezbollah, be it the Houthis, be it the terrorist militias of Iraq, be it terrorist organizations in Central Asia or in Pakistan and even in Afghanistan. So no, I mean, any kind of margin that you give the Iranian regime is going to be considered an opportunity for them. So yes, they can call it posturing, but it is a smart tactic of showing determination to the Iranian regime and telling them that if they do not comply with the requirements that are being made by the United States and other allies in the world, they will face serious consequences.
Okay, but with the US having substantial military assets near Iran as these talks are carried out, how does this association of diplomacy and military readiness affect Tehran's negotiating calculation?
Well, exactly. It's the only way to make them acknowledge and to accept the demands that are being put on the table and on the negotiating table. Otherwise, Tehran would still drag its feet as they always do, and they would try to fool their interlocutors as they always do. They would try to lie their way out of these negotiations as they always do. The only way to make them accept what they do not want to accept is by showing them that force is ready and available, that the legitimate use of force is an option that is open and on the table. If they do not comply with what is demanded from them, they have to face these serious consequences. This regime is imploding right now. We know that the tens of thousands of Iranians that have been brutally massacred by this bloodthirsty regime are claiming for justice, dignity, and freedom. And it's not about, these negotiations are not about the regime change. These negotiations are basically now for regional stability and security. Let us not forget that the missile capabilities of Tehran, and if eventually they were to develop a nuclear weapon, this is not a threat to Israel only. This is not a threat to Saudi Arabia or to the United Arab Emirates or to Bahrain, that has been a target of Iran's wrath over and over and over again, or Jordan. It is also a huge threat to Central Asia and countries like yours that are a stone throw away from Iran. And that in many ways, you know, there is I have been to Iran many times, there is an imperialistic sense in this regime, and they feel that many of the Central Asian republics are part of their past and lost empire. So let's not forget that too.
And how do regional players, Ambassador, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Gulf states interpret these talks? Are they supportive of diplomacy or skeptical of a deal?
There's some nuances here. I mean, you have mentioned countries that are not very friendly with Iran. Obviously, Israel is a sworn enemy. That is obvious. And for Prime Minister Netanyahu, the armed response is the prime response or the prime option that they would want to see. The United States is favoring diplomacy, as we know. Of course, the great allies of the West and the important nations that you mentioned, especially Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates, are concerned about tensions in the region. But it is in their best interest that Tehran complies with the demands that are being made, because it is their security that is at stake. And then, of course, we have the very special case of Qatar, which has in its national identity and DNA the quest and the determination to mediate in as many conflicts as necessary. And they are going to do as much as possible, as they have done in the past in other conflicts, to try to ease the tensions. And I think that is very noble and laudable. And I think that each and every country in the Gulf has an extremely important role to play in these times. Of course, the majority of them want diplomacy, but make no mistake about it, they don't want a nuclear Iran. That is a nightmare for all of them.
And there's been talk of confidence-building measures like partial sanctions relief or steps toward phased compliance. Which of these are feasible and which are deal breakers?
I think that this question is extremely pertinent. You see, there is a big difference between replicating JCPOA and applying exactly what you said. Partial sanctions lifting, and it has to be done on a benchmark and landmark compliance. If we impose certain obligations to the Iranian regime, we need to determine and to check without any kind of doubt or second thought that these demands have been met by the regime. If that is the case, and if the IAEA has been able to inspect the sites, if independent inspectors are able to determine that the missile capacities of Iran have been scrapped, if we are able to determine that their support for terrorist organizations in the region has effectively dwindled or disappeared, then we can slowly build those confidence-building measures and lift sanctions gradually, and not completely and totally from the beginning, as was the case of JCPOA, and there was one of the big mistakes of that initiative. So we cannot replicate the mistakes of the past.
Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your insight and analysis.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Now, after the break, we'll take a look at major stories from the region. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. The UK has signed a deal with Kazakhstan on critical minerals at talks in London with 5 Central Asian countries. Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper has been hosting her counterparts from Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. The CA5+1 format was the first of its kind between London and the Central Asian countries. Ollie Barrett reports from the talks.
Well, the UK has been holding a series of discussions here at Lancaster House in central London, which is one of the Foreign Office's properties here in the British capital. And a number of important deals have been announced, perhaps the centrepiece of which is the critical minerals agreement between the UK and Kazakhstan. The idea of it is to boost UK investment into Kazakhstan in a way that will allow the UK to diversify its supply of critical minerals. It's also designed to try and reduce its reliance in that regard on China. But there have been a number of other agreements beyond that signed by Yvette Cooper, the UK Foreign Secretary, and her Kazakh counterpart, Mr. Kosherbayev, here in the British capital. Just let me take you through a few of them. There will be a new agreement on British education cooperation. That's between the UK, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. Coventry University will open a second campus in Almaty. Cardiff University will open a new AI centre at its campus in Astana. We're also seeing Valor Carbon, which is a British startup. that's announcing a tie-up with the government of Kyrgyzstan. It's an investment of around $140 million US, which we're told will plant 25,000 hectares of forest. As I say, the UK is using these discussions, the first of their type in this format here in London, to try and show its commitment to the region. And the words of Yvette Cooper in that regard, let's listen to them. She says Central Asia is an important region with huge potential to boost economic growth. And the agreements signed here, she says, deliver for British business, strengthen economic security, and she also says they're a demonstration of UK support for the independence of Central Asian states. So the UK stressing that these are key discussions here in London, which they believe have delivered really important results. Ollie Barrett for A News at Lancaster House in London.
Pakistani jets bombed Kabul, Kandahar and Paktia in Afghanistan in the early hours of Friday morning. Islamabad said the airstrikes were in retaliation for attacks along their adjoining border.
Pakistan says it's in open war with its neighbour Afghanistan. That's according to Pakistani Defence Minister Khawaja Mohammad Asif in a post on X on Friday. He declared that Islamabad's patience had run out as tensions escalated overnight, with both sides reporting heavy losses. Airstrikes were launched on several cities in Afghanistan in the early hours of Friday morning, including Kabul, Kandahar and Paktia. Officials said they were targeting Taliban posts, headquarters and ammunition depots. Islamabad accuses Kabul of harbouring Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan militants, a charge the Taliban-led government denies. The latest escalation comes after the Taliban launched retaliatory attacks on Pakistani border posts on Thursday. Speaking on Pakistan TV, Islamabad's information minister, Ataullah Tarar, said nothing justified the Afghan attacks.
That the Afghan Taliban regime has been harboring terrorists, they have been protecting these terrorists, and by this unprovoked aggression earlier tonight, they have shown to the world that they are just there to protect these terrorists and promote them. Otherwise, there was no justification for this unprovoked aggression across the border tonight.
Afghanistan's Taliban government said the attacks it carried out on Thursday were launched in response to strikes by Pakistan earlier this week, which killed 18 people. Taliban spokesperson Wahidullah Mohammadi said the retaliatory operation focused on Nangarhar and Kunar provinces.
Dear compatriots, in response to the recent airstrikes carried out by Pakistani forces in Nangarhar and Paktia, heavy attacks have begun tonight at 8 p.m. in Nangarhar and Kunar provinces. Keep us in your prayers.
The fighting this week marks the most serious escalation between the neighbours in months and threatens a ceasefire along the two countries' 2,600-kilometre border.
Pakistan says it's now involved in an open war with Afghanistan. The comment from the country's defence minister comes after the Afghan Taliban launched a large-scale offensive along its frontier with Pakistan. Hira Mustafa has more from Pakistan.
Pakistan has called its strikes inside Afghanistan a major military operation. It claims it's destroyed dozens of tanks, artillery pieces and personnel carriers. It claims 27 Afghan Taliban posts had been destroyed and 9 had been captured. Security forces claim they destroyed 2 brigade headquarters in Kabul, as well as an ammunition depot and military installations in the Kandahar province. Immediately after the Afghan Taliban announced a military offensive against Pakistan on Thursday, the country's information ministry took to social media platform X, saying Pakistani troops had delivered an immediate and effective response. Pakistan's Prime Minister and the country's president say Islamabad has always promoted peace, but the country's integrity will not be compromised, and the armed forces have the capacity to crush any aggression from across the border. The situation on both sides of the border remains tense, with the Pakistan Army on high alert along the Durand Line, a 2,611-kilometre-long de facto border between the two countries. But not just along the border, security across Pakistan has been heightened. Here in Islamabad, mosques, markets and the Red Zone, home to key government buildings, is seeing increased security deployment. The country's defence minister, Khawaja Asif, says Islamabad's patience with Afghanistan has run out and that Pakistan will retaliate against military aggression. Relations between the neighbors have plunged in recent months, with land border crossings shut since deadly border fighting in October last year that killed more than 70 people on both sides. The two countries later signed a Qatar-mediated ceasefire but failed to reach a wider agreement to end hostilities completely. Foreign ministers of Iran, Saudi Arabia and Russia have now urged both sides to resolve the conflict through dialogue and have offered to mediate. Pakistan accuses Afghanistan of sheltering militants responsible for cross-border attacks. Earlier this month, a suicide bombing at a Shia mosque in Islamabad killed over 30 people, with Islamabad blamed on Afghan-based militant groups. Hira Mustafa for A News in Islamabad.
Afghanistan says it launched retaliatory operations against Pakistani military targets along the Durand Line, while Pakistan insists it responded to unprovoked attacks. Fighting has now stopped, but tensions remain high. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has the latest from Kabul.
Fighting overnight along the Durand Line has left dozens reported dead, according to officials on both sides, before coming to a halt early this morning. Afghanistan's government spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid says Afghan forces began extensive retaliatory operations against Pakistani military centers following what Kabul describes as repeated aggression. Afghan officials report that around 55 Pakistani forces were killed in clashes, with some bodies transferred into Afghan custody. In a detailed statement, Afghanistan's Ministry of National Defense says the fighting began at 8 p.m. on February 26th and lasted about 4 hours. Afghan forces claim they targeted Pakistani positions near Paktika, Paktia, Khost, Nangarhar, Kunar and Nuristan provinces, killing 55 Pakistani soldiers, capturing 2 bases and 19 posts, and seizing weapons and equipment. They also report 8 Afghan fighters killed and 11 wounded. 13 civilians were said to have been injured in a strike on a refugee camp in Nangarhar. Pakistan is disputing that account. Its information ministry says Afghan Taliban forces opened fire on multiple points along the border in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, prompting what it describes as an immediate and effective response. Early Friday morning, Afghan officials also accused Pakistan of carrying out airstrikes in Kabul, Kandahar and Paktia provinces, though they say no casualties were reported. With sharply conflicting claims and no independent confirmation of casualty figures, the situation along the border remains volatile. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Iran has urged Afghanistan and Pakistan to resort to dialogue to sort out their differences, warning that backlash of armed conflicts between its eastern neighbours will go beyond their borders. Our correspondent Turaj Shuraliliu has more from Tehran.
Iran's top diplomat Abbas Araghchi on Friday called for Afghanistan and Pakistan to resolve their differences through dialogue, offering Tehran's assistance to facilitate understanding between its eastern neighbors. In a post on social media X, he wrote, "It is appropriate for Afghanistan and Pakistan to manage and resolve existing differences within the framework of good neighborliness and through dialogue." He added that Iran is ready to provide any assistance in facilitating dialogue and strengthening understanding and cooperation between the two countries. Iran does not recognize the Taliban-led government in neighboring Afghanistan, but has maintained its diplomatic presence in the capital Kabul and exchanged delegations on bilateral issues. Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghai told a weekly press briefing on Monday that Iran will announce its decision on recognition of Taliban government when it comes to a final decision. He also warned that escalation of tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan will have repercussions beyond their borders. Last year, Tehran offered mediation between Islamabad and Kabul and hosted a meeting of Afghanistan's neighboring countries plus Russia. But authorities in Afghanistan decided to skip the key event. Turaj Shuraliliu, Tehran, for A News.
As cities expand and risks intensify, the issue of resilient and affordable housing is moving to the forefront of the global agenda. In May, Baku will host the 13th World Urban Forum, where governments, urban planners and international organisations will gather to focus on practical solutions, with preparations now entering a decisive stage. Aytan Shukurova has more.
Housing the world, safe and resilient cities and communities. This slogan reflects one of the most urgent global challenges today: how to provide adequate, affordable and climate-resilient housing for a rapidly growing urban population. Nearly 3 billion people worldwide are estimated to lack access to safe, adequate housing. Cities are expanding, climate risks are increasing, and inequality continues to shape urban development. Against this backdrop, World Urban Forum 13, which will be hosted in Baku in May 2026, aims to place housing at the center of the global urban agenda. Organizers and UN Habitat representatives outlined how Azerbaijan is preparing to host this major global platform, which will bring together governments, urban planners, international organizations and civil society to discuss practical solutions for safer and more resilient cities.
3 billion people do not have adequate housing today. And we also have 1.1 billion people living in slums and informal settlements in highly precarious conditions. We also have over 300 million people facing conditions of homelessness. So the magnitude of the challenge is very significant, but there are solutions and there are practices that can help to address this challenge. So at the World Urban Forum, what we would like to do is to spotlight on solutions and spotlight on practices that are working and connect these practices with practitioners globally so that we can scale them and we can see how they're applied in different places. Of course, the global housing crisis is affecting also other aspects of global development. It's very closely linked to the climate crisis. It's very closely linked to conflict and displacement. And also it's closely linked to issues of poverty and inequality. So if we address housing issues and have better adequate housing globally, we do believe strongly, and the evidence shows that the impact on all aspects of social, economic and environmental development globally will be very positive. And this is why the World Urban Forum in Baku will be extremely important for the global development agenda, and in particular the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations.
As they mentioned, housing is not only about shelter, it is about stability, economic opportunity, social cohesion and resilience against crisis, whether environmental, economic or geopolitical. Aytan Shukurova with Zainal Hassanov, A News.
Now we'll take a short break, and when we return we'll examine the sharp escalation on the Pakistan-Afghanistan front, with Islamabad declaring open war and cross-border strikes intensifying, and explore what that means for regional security and diplomatic prospects. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Pakistan's Defence Minister has announced that Islamabad is in an open war with neighbouring Afghanistan after a sharp escalation in border fighting and cross-border airstrikes, marking a significant breakdown in relations between the two countries. The announcement follows a series of deadly clashes along the Durand Line, intensive bombing by Pakistan on Afghan territory, including in and around Kabul, Kandahar and Paktia, and conflicting claims about casualties from both sides. The Defence Minister said Pakistan's patience has reached its limit and blamed the Afghan Taliban government for harbouring militant groups. Afghanistan has disputed Pakistan's claims and reported its own military responses, including attacks on Pakistani positions. Now let's bring in our guest, Ashfaq Ahmed. He's chairman at the Department of Politics and International Relations from the University of Sarkodha, Punjab, Pakistan. Mr. Ashfaq Ahmed, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Now, why have tensions escalated to the point where Islamabad now describes the situation as open war?
Okay, so we cannot directly go to the the statement that the defense minister has revealed that this is an open war. In fact, you have to go back to the background. For example, last year in October there was a suicide attack on a Pakistani court And then this year, on February 6th, there was a suicide attack inside a Shiite mosque, wherein more than 70 people were martyred and more than 100 were injured. Afterwards, a military convoy was attacked by a suicide bomber, and according to Pakistan intelligence information, the suicide bomber traveled all the way from Afghanistan to Pakistan. And following that attack, there was another attack, which was also targeted against Pakistan military. And then there was some military officials. They were on their routine training, and they were attacked. And one of the senior military commanders in Pakistan, he was also killed in the attack. So this is the overall background, and because of this, the strategic patience that Pakistan had that was lost, and then the airstrikes were carried out inside Afghanistan.
What does, okay, you're saying it was accumulative there with the suicide bombing, the mosque attacks and so forth. What does Pakistan mean though by open war? And how does that differ from prolonged border skirmishes or clashes that we've seen previously?
Okay, so again, I will be referring to 2025. In 2025, there were more than 1,000 attacks on Pakistani military officials across the KPK province and the Balochistan province. And all these attacks were linked with Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan. And Pakistan believed that TTP is basically harbored, and it is provided safe haven by Tehrik-e-Taliban Afghanistan. So as far as this open war statement or rhetoric is concerned, it means that Pakistan military and Afghan military are now in direct confrontation. Previously, Pakistan was attacking the militant hideouts of Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan inside Afghanistan, but this time the difference is that Pakistan is attacking military or brigade headquarters of Afghan Taliban. And one of the significant feature of these attacks is that the ammunition that Americans left, a small weapon or that is being carried by one Taliban worth around 5,000 US dollars. And it is equipped with night vision. So one of the aim of these targets is that to attack and destroy such munitions which are being used against Pakistan. And recently, on 31st January 2026, Baloch Liberation Army, its workers, or militants, they carried attacks across Balochistan. So the same weapons were used by Taliban, which were used by Taliban, were used by Baloch Liberation Army fighters against Pakistan army. So open war, in short, means that now Pakistan is targeting military headquarters or assets of Afghan Taliban.
Okay, so are they primarily targeting militant groups, or is this telling of a broader shift in military policy?
So this particular strategy, it has two legs. One is that it is continuously attacking the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan sanctuaries or hideouts inside Afghanistan. That was done previously, but this time you would have heard and you have reported also that Pakistan Air Force has carried out attacks inside Kabul or inside Afghanistan, other provinces, Nangarhar and Paktia province. So the aim of this particular strategy is to attack Afghan military targets and Taliban hideouts, Pakistani Taliban hideouts inside Afghanistan.
Okay. And the defense ministers accused the Afghan leadership of exporting terrorism and acting as a proxy for India. How significant are these allegations in shaping Pakistan's public basis for escalation?
Okay, thank you very much for asking me this question, bringing in India. We had this relation with India. In 1971, we were dismembered by Indian intelligence agency, and the dismembered portion today, it is called Bangladesh. So the terrorist organization India created was called Makti Bahini. So India has its roots of involvement inside Pakistan, and then there was an Indian naval intelligence official who was operating inside Pakistan and in Balochistan. So that is the second issue due to which we are calling that India is now using Afghanistan as a proxy. And moreover, you would also have read about the killing of Hardeep Singh Najjar, who was killed in British Columbia, Canada by Indian intelligence agency. Similarly, Tamil Tigers of Sri Lanka, they were also trained and they were harbored by Indian intelligence agency RAW. So there is involvement of India, and they are using Afghan Taliban as a proxy. And moreover, DG ISPR Ahmed Sharif Chaudhry previously has shown evidences of Indian involvement. For example, the currency which was recovered from the hideouts of Taliban, sanctuaries in Pakistan, and the Indian medicine which was recovered from these sanctuaries. We have all these evidences which prove that now India is using Taliban as a proxy.
And there are conflicting casualty claims here. Pakistan says it's killed hundreds of militants. Afghanistan claims fewer losses and some Pakistani soldiers killed. How should we interpret these differing reports?
So this war, it has become a gray zone war also, and it is a hybrid warfare launched by both sides. Now they are using social media, the both sides. So there are conflicting reports, but there is no ground check. Nobody can confirm whether which side is actually reporting correctly. So these are just to boost the morale of the peace of the people on both sides and the morale of the ground forces. So I would interpret it like this.
Okay. Taliban-led Kabul has historically denied hosting anti-Pakistan militant groups. How do these denials and Islamabad's accusations complicate diplomatic options?
Okay, so this is the very basis of the problem, because one Taliban, they have always refuted that they are part of the problem. Now they have provided sanctuaries to Pakistani Taliban because there is ideological affinity between both these groups. Both are following Deoband school of thought. They're hardcore militants and they're fanatics. Both sides are fanatic. And secondly, if Afghan Taliban will not provide safe sanctuaries to these Pakistani Taliban, then Afghan Taliban fear that they can join hands with the Islamic State of Khorasan, which is already operating inside Afghanistan, which is already creating a problem, internal problem for Afghanistan. And previously, ISK or Islamic State of Khorasan, they have killed several Afghan Taliban. So they fear. So they have a bad option and worst option. They're confronted with this particular issue.
Okay, Ashfaq, thank you for joining us and for your analysis today. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for having me.
You're up to date with world news for the hour. Stay with us on A News for more updates, and thank you for watching.